disappointing installment in my series on how to ruin your classic car and or truck. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to repair a cracked fender using a Mig welder. We've got a pretty typical crack here. And another small one right here. So before I get too carried away with the rest of this, as I'm hammering on it, it's just wanting to flop around. So we're gonna just go ahead and get this fully welded up and secured now, so that I don't have to worry about it cracking anymore or, you know, doing weird stuff. So, but it's starting to kind of go back where it needs to be. Okay, I got my Mig welder fired up here. I'm using a Hobart 140. I picked this welder up for 200 bucks out of the back of a guy's van a few years back, and it's the best 200 bucks I ever spent. So we're running 023 Mig wire, 7525 argon CO2 Mig mix for gas. And what we're gonna do here is we got this fender flipped upside down, and I'm going to pull these two sections together, and then I'm going to put a tack right here. Okay, ready? Okay, well, we have encountered a bit of a setback. It would appear that I am all out of welding wire. Now, I could go to the store and buy some, but that would mean that I would have to deal with the general public, And well, that doesn't sound like very much fun. So we're gonna change course here a little bit, and we're gonna show you guys how you can repair a crack like this using basic household items and whatever we have laying around. So it'll be just as good as welding it, but we won't have to go to the stores. So here are the materials that you're going to need for your weldless crack repair. Start out, fiberglass short strand filler. Now, I feel kind of bad because in my last video I made a little joke about using this to fix cracks, and you know, it was kind of misleading. So, but believe it or not, there is actually a correct way to do a structurally sound crack repair with this stuff. So this time I'm actually going to show you the correct way to use this to fix cracks. Again, I apologize to anyone who was misled in my last video. I really feel terrible about that. So I'll make it up to you guys this time and show you how to do this right. So in addition to our fiberglass filler, we have a variety of putty knives. The next material that we need is what's going to make this repair actually structurally sound. So I went out to my backyard and found a couple of tree branches. Now when you're using this, you want to find something with a little bit of flex to it. You see that flexing? So the reason for that is if you use a harder wood, it could crack again, because as this car is going down the road, the fender is flexing and vibrating. So you want to try to use a tree branch with some give to it, and that way it's going to be strong, but it's still going to be flexible. So we got 2 pieces like that, should be enough to complete the repair on this crack. You don't want to clean any of the surface rust from the inside. I know people say filler won't stick to rust, but what we're going to do is we're going to take our pancake syrup and we're going to mix a little bit of that in with the filler. I'll show you the correct ratio when we go to mix the filler, but we're going to mix that in. So what that's going to do is it's going to help the filler to actually chemically bond to the rust, and it's going to seal that rust in. There's no way it can ever get out. So to begin our repair, I'm going to take these tree branch sections and I'm going to cut them down to about 6 to 8 inches long. Typically you want 3 to 4 inches of tree branch on each side of the crack. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but we'll start cutting. So I decided to just use the 2 main ones. We're going to use the thickest one along the edge, thinner one further up. And then because the fender curves more as it gets towards the top, I'm going to use these little smaller ones as reinforcements. So if you think about using rebar in concrete, it's basically going to be the same principle. And I just want to take a quick moment for safety. Always wear gloves to protect your fingers while you're mixing up filler. So okay, now that we're safe, let's get started. So we're going to add a couple of ribbons of hardener here. That's good enough. We want a little more dry time on this, so don't need too much hardener. And now I'm going to get this all stirred up here. Cardboard sure is great for mixing filler on. Nice because you pick up little pieces of cardboard and helps to strengthen the filler. Now this is where the pancake syrup comes in. You want to add your pancake syrup in the same ratio as your hardener. Oh well. We'll just do like that. Don't need a lot, but you definitely want to make sure you get the right amount in there. So I'll mix this in and then we'll be ready to start applying the filler. I think that's going to be good. So now I'm going to start applying my filler, a fairly heavy coat, to the inside of the crack. almost forgot a pretty important step here. I take a little syrup and just go inside like that. That's better. Tell this is working great already. I want the filler to be about ½ inch in there. Oh, I forgot which branches I was going to use. Shoot. Well, hopefully we can get this done before the filler hardens. And you just press the branch in there so it's nice and firm. Is that even where the crack is? I think so. Yeah, okay. And then we'll just kind of smush over that a little bit. Get it buried in there. There we go. Perfect. Then we'll take our other branch here. We'll get that one put in right about here. And then we'll take our smaller reinforcements. And one in there. And one right there. Oops, we got a little, that's okay. There we go. Poke that in. That's perfect. You know what, let's add one more thick branch here. There. Now we'll just take their remaining filler here and just kind of smooth over this. Doesn't have to be perfect. You're going to want to let that harden up for 8 to 10 business days. And don't disturb the fender, just let it sit there on the floor. And we'll come back in about a week and we'll show you the next step. Well, we've waited our mandatory 8 to 10 business days. It's a little sticky from the syrup, but that's what you want. Now, don't worry about any of these little branches sticking out. What'll happen is when you mount this fender on the car and you go for a drive, hit the railroad tracks, go over a couple bumps, the tire will just snap off any remaining branches. So I don't get worried about details like that. If you're taking this to a car show, what you can do is get some heavy undercoat and spray over that once the branches snap off. And you know, you have some judge looking over it and they feel up in your fender for this type of repair, they're gonna know it was done right. So that's really getting hot. Well, we got our fender flipped over here and we can see the other side of the repair. Now, we do have a little bit of misalignment here, but that's what you want, okay? Now you can see the filler and a little bit of syrup seeping through. Again, that's exactly what we want to see here. If you were a real craftsman, what you could do is you could take your fiberglass filler and then do another coat over top of here just to ensure that it's sealed up. But I'm pretty confident in this, so we're just going to cheat and we're going to go straight to our regular body filler and we're going to apply that, and we're going to just coat basically this whole area here. So let's get our filler on. Now I know what you're thinking. This looks like a lot of filler. And you're right, it is. But I've been doing it this way for 40 years. Never had a repair fail yet. Of course, none of the cars I've worked on have ever ended up on the road. But why anyone would want to actually weld something is beyond me. huge waste of your customers' money. So many body men are just out to rip off their customers, trying to charge them for labor and things like that. No, body men ought to work for free. It's really not that hard. Okay, we've got our filler on now. We're going to let that harden up for another 8 to 10 business days. Then next step is optional. Now you can either leave this the way that it is to show off all your hard work, or if you're really fussy, you can go over this and sand it all smooth. So in the interest of making a comprehensive video on this repair, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get this all sanded smooth. Okay, well that's going to need another 2 or 3 dozen coats of filler on it, so we'll just keep applying filler until it smooths itself out. Well, let's have a look at the completed repair, shall we? See, we've still got a little tree branch there, which is a good sign. You'd never know that there was a crack there before. And you know, hear that? See how tinny that sounds compared to this? This is solid. That's what you want. So I know not all of you are going to be doing body work on your own cars, but a lot of you may be thinking about purchasing a classic car, or you might buy one with the body work already done to save yourself some time. So what you want to look for when you're looking at a car is when you feel along the edges of all the fenders, and this is what you want to see. You want a nice thick edge there, very inconsistent, and at least 1 or 2 little tree limbs hanging on the inside there, so you know it's an organic repair. Anyways, I know that I promised a video on welding cracks, so please stick around. We are going to do a crack repair. I went out against my better judgment and I bought some more Mig wire, so we'll be able to do a crack repair with the Mig as well, and then we'll do a comparison between that and this repair, and we'll see which one is superior. I've been hammering away on this fender here, and you know, it's slowly getting there, but while I was working on it, I noticed I've got a little high spot here on my filler. I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you how you can tap down a high spot like that without actually cracking your filler. So just take my body hammer here, and we're just gonna just let the hammer bounce off the surface. Okay, we're still a little high there, so I'm just gonna take my hammer and I'm gonna set that aside, and I'm gonna try a little different technique here. And if the hammer doesn't work, I always go to this technique, and it works every time. Okay, well the good news here is the high spot has been taken care of. The bad news is it would appear that our repair has failed. Interestingly enough though, the filler has actually removed a layer of surface rust. So might be a good alternative to sandblasting, if nothing else. The shining light here is that we do now once again have a crack, and we do have Mig wire again. So we're gonna get this all cleaned up here, and we'll get rid of the maple syrup, and then we'll start over with a welded repair. So what I did here is I took one of these fiber wheels and I just mounted it in a 90-degree grinder like this. You can also mount these in like a drill or whatever. And I just cleaned all the metal where I'm going to be welding. You don't want to use the grinding disc for this because this metal is extremely thin, and so anything that removes metal is just going to make it a lot harder to weld. So you want to keep all our metal there. I also took a piece of sandpaper on each side and I sanded this crack so that the metal's nice and clean, or as clean as we can possibly get it. Clean the back side as well, so it's all, always get the metal as clean as possible. Cleaner metal it is, easier it is to weld. Now, last thing I'm going to do before I start welding this is I'm going to find the end of each crack. You can see there's a couple branching off here. I'm going to take a very small drill bit and I'm going to just drill a hole at the end of each crack to stop it. Now, I don't know if this is really necessary because all of these cracks, they all originate here. So this is solid. You know, it's not going to just randomly start cracking up here. Anyways, just so we can say that we did it, we're going to do it. Takes an extra 30 seconds, so not a big deal. Might as well. There's the holes drilled. In my last crack repair video, I said to start at the body line and the edge and then work your way in. That was my original plan for this as well, but just to show you that there's no set way to do this, I'm going to start here instead, because when I get this lined up and then pull it together, my body line still lines up. And if I start here, you can see there is a gap here though. So if I start here, that's going to shrink, and then I'm going to have to run my zip disc through here and probably keep running my zip disc, because this thick whole thing, as soon as this shrinks, this is going to close up. So instead, we're going to try starting here and then working our way down. Now we're not welding it, we're just going to tack it about every inch, and then we'll see how that works out for us. But just wanted to show you guys, if you're doing something and you think there's an easier way to do it or a better way, then don't be afraid to try. Worst case scenario, this doesn't work and we have to cut it back apart and start here. But the plan always changes, so we're gonna go with that. We'll see how it works out. So now you can see we're all tack welded all along here. About I ended up placing a tack about every half inch or so. And on the edge here, I went ahead and just fully welded that. I fully welded this because it already lined up and I don't have a lot of hammer and dolly work to do on this edge. So this is going to be okay. But I didn't want to fully weld this for another reason. That's because this is still pretty hammered, still pretty beat up and chunky. And a MIG weld is a lot harder than a TIG weld. So I don't want to do a whole bunch of hammer and dolly work on this after it's been welded, because the more hammer and dolly work you do, the more the metal becomes work hardened. And the more work hardened it becomes, the more brittle it gets. and the more chance that this could crack. So now that it's at least locked into place, I can go over this whole area, hammer and dolly it, get it reasonably smooth, or as smooth as we're going to go on this project. Then once I'm happy with that, I'll come back and then we'll go back and fully weld this. You can see I got this crack area all smoothed out and ready to weld. And once again, I went against my own teachings, and I just got this area smoothed out. But as I said in my last video, when you're trying to repair something with a lot of damage on it, you want to work the whole panel at once. So the only reason I did this is because this video on the repairs of this Fender was going to get pretty long. So I decided to split it up into 2 videos. So stay tuned for the repairs on this Fender. But to keep it short, I'm just going to focus on the crack repair for this video. I'm going to live to regret not fixing this all on one plane, but again, do as I say, not as I do. So you can see we've got fairly tight gap. It's a little fatter here, but because we're MIG welding it, we'll be okay with that. We'll make it work. Obviously, the tighter your gap is, the easier it's going to be to weld. So I've seen a lot of videos now on MIG welding thin sheet metal, and what they do is they just put a tack here and a tack here and just keep tacking, one tack at a time, and then grind it down, and then go back and touch up any spots that they missed. I have been playing around with that, and it does work for certain situations, but for this I'm going to show you the way that I was taught to do it, and then at the end I'll explain why I do it this way and why I still prefer it. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this, but I'm just going to show you how I do it, and you know, you can either do it that way or you cannot. I don't care. So I'm going to start at the top here. I just did 3 tacks all together. Now I'm going to wait until this is cool enough where I can touch it with my hand, and it's going to be the same temperature as the surrounding metal. Here's the completed weld. You can see that's a pretty ugly looking weld. You know, don't expect to get perfect welds on old sheet metal like this. This Fender's almost 90 years old and it's been laying outside for probably most of its life. So all you want to do is get a solid weld. But you can see I was just going along and doing 3 tacks at once, slightly overlapping each one. Then I would let it cool until it was the weld was the same temperature as the surrounding metal, and I could put my hand on it without getting burnt. And then 3 more, same process. Each one I would just overlap them all slightly. And you can see the importance of having a tight gap, because if you remember, down here we had a wider gap. You can see how the weld's a lot uglier here because we were trying to fill a gap, and the metal is obviously pretty thin on these Fenders. So you know, we were able to get through it. But a little tip for doing that, if you do have a gap, you can take a piece of copper pipe and then hammer it flat and then clamp it from the back side, and the weld won't stick to the copper, so you can weld and it'll just bridge across the two pieces of metal, and the copper will prevent you from blowing a hole through. So I don't do that because I've welded so much thin sheet metal that I usually just power through it. But if you are learning to do this, that is a good tip for you know, making this a little easier on you. So you see at the back side of the repair, we've got good penetration all the way through. There's no gaps in between the welds here. It's all consistently fused together. This is probably a bit more penetration than what you would ideally want to see. However, I generally prefer to weld hotter rather than colder. So now we know this is all solidly fused together. So we're going to do a quick demonstration here to show you the importance of getting a hot weld or good penetration versus a cold weld. So you can see this is our hot weld here. Got all of our little welds. This isn't a very pretty weld again, you know, but just zipped it together quickly. You look at the back side. You've got good penetration all the way through. So here's our cold weld. You can see you've got a pretty ropey seam here. Small heat effect zone though. But again, we were welding both of these all in one pass. So if you were doing this on sheet metal, you would again do, I find about 3 tacks at once is kind of the magic number to keep stuff from warping on you. So, but we flip it over a cold weld, and you can see there's no penetration whatsoever. You can still see the line where the two pieces were butted together. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my grinder and I'm going to grind both of these welds totally flush and smooth on the outside, and then we're going to destructive test them. So here's the cold weld, no penetration. See how easily that broke? You can see there's just barely any weld coming through. So that is not a good way to weld. Here's the hot weld. Yeah, it's pretty strong. Let's do a little more hammering on that. Oh, still no crack. Now let's try hammering it back straight. And I can feel, as I'm bending this, that the metal's starting to get fatigued around here, but the weld is still intact. So again, there's still quite a bit of strength there. So our next step here is going to be to get this weld ground down. So to start out, I'm going to be using the edge of my grinding wheel. I'm going to take the edge of my grinding wheel and I'm just going to run it across the proud of the weld. You got to be really, really careful with this, because the last thing you want to do is touch the metal with that grinding wheel. So basically I'm just holding it sideways and going across the proud of the weld. If you don't have steady hands, I'd just probably go with one of these and then you know, be careful. But I'm cheap, so these are expensive, so I like to get the majority of the weld knocked off just with the grinding wheel first. And they also do make a belt sander, like a mini belt sander, and you can use that for sanding down the weld. Um, they do work great, but personally I don't like them. One, the belts are really expensive, and two, I've seen a lot of guys where they use them and they actually end up digging a trough into the metal because they keep sanding until the weld is completely disappeared, and by the time they do that, there's a huge groove in it. So now the weld is super weak, and there's a giant, trough into the metal. So those are great tools, but again, they're one of those things that's really easy to abuse. So I just took off the proud of the weld. You could probably go a little bit more, but I'd prefer to be cautious rather than risk hitting the metal, so call it good there. I'm going to take 50 grit on my angle grinder here. You can buy different size pads for these, but what I like to use is the 3-inch one that matches the size of the disc. If you use a smaller one, what will happen is as you're grinding, the disc will flex, and then you'll end up grinding into the metal around rather than the welds. Okay, now you can see how I just used my grinder to grind off the proud of it, and as soon as I started touching the metal here, that's when I stopped. So as you can see, the weld is all slightly lower still. One of the advantages of MIG welding is, for the hobbyist or if you're learning, is you don't have quite as much distortion as you would with a TIG. So, it's not quite as intimidating. Like the way this is right now, you could take your fiber wheel or a wire brush and clean this discoloration out, and you could go straight to filler at this stage, and that would be a totally fine repair. I'm gonna just take this a little further here, and we'll get this kind of dolly back into shape. We're not going for perfection on this, we're just gonna get it a little better. And as you can see on the destructive test, you can do a little bit of hammer and dolly work with the MIG, so we should be able to get this looking a little better here, and then we'll come back and see where we're at. I think what we're going to do is we're just going to try using our bullseye pick to knock this weld back into shape, and we'll see what happens. There's the weld all knocked down now. Again, we're not going for metal finished on this, but you will notice that I was using a bastard file on this. And so what I was doing is, once I got the weld fairly close and the grinder was starting to touch the metal, I switched over to the bastard file just to finish knocking everything smooth. I find these bastard files will cut through a Mig Weld better than the Vixen file. And then that just prevents me from getting too aggressive with the grinder and removing too much metal, because it takes a long time to remove metal with a file. So we're just using the file to help blend everything together here without actually, you know, removing too much material. We should be able to just go straight to sanding now, because the file marks aren't very aggressive. So we'll get this all sanded up, and then we'll come back and take a look at the finished product. So here's our completed repair. Again, we weren't going for a perfect metal finish on this one, but as you can see, our crack has been welded. Right here is where the seam was. So whenever I go to MIG weld something, or even TIG weld, one last thing I do is I take a flashlight and I'll hold it from the back side of the panel. And what I'm looking for is any light showing through any pinholes. And as you can see, there's no pinholes to be found. My reasoning for doing the 3 tacks at a time with slight overlap of each one, instead of doing 1 tack here, 1 tack here, 1 tack here, and just connecting the dots, is because I have been playing around with that other technique, and I find that you get a lot more pinholes that way. And obviously every time you have to grind something down, re-weld it, and then grind it down again, you're just introducing more heat to the panel and more chances of thinning the metal too much. So this way, I find that I get a lot less pinholes because the welds are each stacked, overlapped, and if you just go one at a time and try to connect the dots, what can happen is you end up just building weld on top of weld on top of weld, and then by the time you grind it off, you didn't get consistent penetration. So, but that's just my experience with it. I do find it works better to do that 1 tack at a time if you're doing something on a panel where you don't have access, because you do see a little bit less warpage in the final product. But again, if you do have access, then I would much rather have a solid weld rather than risk having a bunch of pinholes and having to go back and re-weld it a whole bunch of times. So this way is the way I was taught, and this way is the way that I prefer to do it. However, for cracks, I don't use a MIG anymore. I do all my cracks with a TIG. I just find it finishes out a little bit nicer. But this is just a junk Fender that I pulled out of my backyard just to do a couple videos on. So we were going to do one video on the crack and repairing this Fender, but there's just too much to try to fit into one video. So if you're interested, I guess stay tuned or leave a comment and let me know if you want to see the second part on this Fender. We're going to show you how we got the rough out to this stage. We're also going to continue on with the repair here and get all of this, all these lumps and bumps all smoothed out. And we're not going to be metal finishing this, but I just want to show you what can be done with a junk part in a short amount of time. So, you know, if you have a part that's banged up or whatever, instead of trying to find a new one, you can spend a few hours banging on it and see what you get. So that's going to be our next video, probably. I just wanted to give a big thank you to Scott over at Cold War Motors. He, for some reason, gave me a shout out on his channel last week, and I've got a whole bunch of new viewers thanks to him. So if you guys, anyone who was watching before and you're not familiar with Cold War Motors, make sure you go check him out. He's a pretty serious YouTube guy and extremely talented. I forgot to write down all the other nice things that he was paying me to say here, so just just go check him out if you haven't already. He deserves a much wider audience than what he has right now. So also wanted to say thank you to all the people who subscribed to my channel recently or in the past. I never really intended to have such a large audience. I mean, 750 subscribers was more than I would have ever expected. And then to suddenly have that go to over 3,000 now is a little overwhelming. So, I mean, these videos weren't really meant to be watched by more than, like 10 people. So anyways, thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out Cold War Motors if you haven't already. And thank you to everyone who is watching.